The Sierra Nevada Railroad was once infamous as America's deadliest railway stretch. Crew members endured cabin temperatures of 140 degrees Fahrenheit and an atmosphere dense with lethal carbon monoxide. Each year, dozens would collapse, and some never survived. Southern Pacific's drastic solution was to reverse the locomotive entirely, situating the crew ahead of the boiler. While experts condemned this as a reckless and irrational move, this unconventional, backward design ultimately saved lives, silenced critics, and redefined railroad history. How did such a risky venture become legendary? And why did it disappear so swiftly? To understand this, one must grasp the true lethality of the mountain. Donner Pass gashes through the Sierra Nevada like an old wound, ascending from the pine forests near Blue Canyon to an elevation exceeding 7,000 feet. The railway that conquered this formidable mountain battled not only snow and gravity, but also the very contours of the terrain. For almost 40 miles, the tracks disappeared beneath wooden snow sheds and through hand-carved rock tunnels. These shelters, erected after repeated avalanches buried the line, formed an almost continuous, box-like corridor between Blue Canyon and Truckee. Inside, the world compressed into a dark, creaking tube, barely wider than the trains themselves. On the steepest inclines, the gradient reached 2.2%, sufficient to slow heavy freight to a crawl. The railway's response was raw power. Doubling or tripling locomotives, throttles wide open, every engine straining just to propel the steel uphill. Yet, the true peril wasn't external. It was the air itself. When a steam locomotive entered a tunnel or snowshed, its exhaust had no escape. Instead of dissipating harmlessly into the sky, smoke and superheated gases crashed into the low ceiling, curled backward, and enveloped the train. With every foot of forward movement, the tunnel filled with more exhaust, carbon monoxide, sulfur, and steam, until the air behind the engine became a toxic cloud. The longer the shed or tunnel, the denser and more lethal that cloud grew. There was no reprieve. Some tunnels exceeded 1,000 feet in length, offering only darkness and echoing engine noise as companionship. The longest, the original Summit Tunnel, extended 1,659 feet through solid granite. However, the cumulative effect was the real killer. Over a dozen tunnels interconnected by nearly continuous snow sheds created a suffocating gauntlet that could endure for hours. In winter, snowdrifts blocked any chance of ventilation. In summer, the wooden sheds baked under the sun, transforming the interior into an inferno. Trains moved so sluggishly on the grades that exhaust had ample time to accumulate. The mountain's topography trapped the noxious fumes, and the railroad's own protective measures, those miles of sheds intended to safeguard the line from snow, became a hazardous threat to every crew. Inside the cab, men struggled for breath, their eyes burning, lungs aching, sweat streaming as the thermometer climbed past 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The mountain had transformed the railway into a sealed chamber, and every journey through the pass was a perilous gamble with suffocation. Despite the countless trains that ascended the Sierra, the geography remained unaltered. The railroad's most remarkable achievement, crossing the summit, was also its most dangerous flaw. A 40-mile expanse where the very air could kill. Southern Pacific management watched the crew crisis on Donner Pass escalate from bad to worse. With each fresh report of a fireman losing consciousness or an engineer nearly losing control, the company desperately sought solutions, anything short of redesigning the locomotive itself. The initial response involved respirators. In 1905, records indicate the railroad ordered hundreds of cotton and felt masks, distributing them to every crew assigned to the mountain. The instructions were clear. Soak the mask in water, tie it over your nose and mouth, and hope it filtered out the worst of the fumes. But the results were dismal. The masks quickly became clogged with soot after just a few tunnels. Breathing through them became almost as difficult as inhaling the smoke itself. Crews reported headaches, dizziness, and a lingering sour taste long after they had exited the sheds. In the most severe instances, the masks offered no benefit whatsoever. Men continued to collapse, and incident logs continued to accumulate entries. Next came mechanical adjustments. Southern Pacific's engineers experimented with deflectors affixed to the smokestack, metal hoods and angled plates designed to direct the exhaust higher or to the side, away from the cab. The theory appeared promising on paper. In practice, the smoke disregarded the hardware. Inside a tunnel, the exhaust still slammed into the roof, dispersed, and flowed directly back into the cab. Deflectors occasionally worsened visibility, scattering soot onto the windows and obstructing the crew's view of signals. One test in 1907 nearly resulted in an accident when the engineer, unable to discern a stop signal through the haze, braked purely on instinct. Safety circulars from this period reveal a growing sense of futility. Dispatchers were instructed to stagger train movements, allowing longer intervals between runs for tunnels to clear. Crews were reminded to keep cab doors open for airflow, to watch for signs of heat exhaustion, and to tie wet rags around their faces if all else failed. Yet, none of these measures addressed the fundamental issue: the design of the locomotive itself. The air inside the sheds grew progressively hotter, the smoke thicker, and the list of hospitalizations longer. In 1906 alone, over 20 crew members received treatment for gas poisoning on the Donner Line. The company's own reports conceded that every attempted fix had failed to make a significant difference. By 1908, the frustration was undeniable. The men on the mountain were exhausted, infuriated, and desperate for an effective solution. The old remedies, masks, deflectors, new operating regulations, were merely temporary fixes for a persistent wound. Management faced a clear choice: continue applying superficial solutions or risk everything on a design that defied conventional wisdom. In the spring of 1908, the Southern Pacific boardroom resembled a battleground more than a business establishment. The crisis on Donner Pass had become inescapable. Reports of crewmen collapsing in tunnels continually landed on William Hood's desk, each serving as a stark reminder that the company's most significant engineering feat was now its most perilous liability. Hood, the railroad's chief engineer, was no stranger to danger. He had spent decades combating Sierra storms and avalanches, meticulously designing the very snow sheds that now trapped deadly fumes. However, the proposal he presented that year was unprecedented. His solution sounded like heresy to most of the men in the room. Flip the locomotive around, placing the cab at the very front, with the boiler and smokestack trailing behind. The crew would finally breathe clean air, leading the train into the darkness instead of choking on exhaust. The logic was straightforward, but the implications were stark. Union leaders and senior engineers nearly scoffed him out of the room. Representatives from the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers labeled it a death trap. Without the boiler in front, they argued, every engineer and fireman would be exposed to any obstruction or collision. There would be no buffer, no protection. Safety memos circulated, warning of lawsuits and liability should even a single accident occur. The design was derided as a freak show in trade journals. Railroad Gazette published a cartoon depicting a train seemingly fleeing from itself, with the crew bracing for impact. Yet, Hood found allies among the men who actually operated on the mountain. Petitions, signed by engineers who had lost friends in the tunnels, landed on his desk. Some simply scrawled, "We want to breathe." For them, the abstract risk of a head-on collision paled in comparison to the certainty of suffocation. Hood presented his case with concrete figures. Over 20 crewmen hospitalized for gas poisoning in a single year, and 3 deaths since 1905. The company's own safety logs painted a grim picture, detailing every failed fix, every near miss, and every man who stumbled out of a tunnel coughing blood. The debate dragged on for months. Internal memos from 1908 reveal the board divided between adhering to tradition and ensuring survival. Julius Kuchnet, the safety chief, cautioned that the railroad would be gambling with lives and public trust. Hood countered with the stark reality on the ground. If nothing changed, the next headline would be a runaway train carrying a dead crew into a town below. By year's end, desperation prevailed. Southern Pacific sent a formal contract to Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, ordering a batch of experimental articulated engines, cab in front, firebox in the rear, oil-fired to enable fuel to be piped from the trailing tender. It was a plunge into the unknown. No other American railroad had dared to operate mainline engines in this configuration. The decision triggered widespread skepticism throughout the industry, but for the men on Donner Pass, it represented a lifeline. The company had staked its reputation and the lives of its crews on a design that appeared flawed from every angle. The actual test would commence when those initial cab-forward behemoths emerged from the Baldwin shops in 1910 and confronted the mountain themselves. Baldwin's Philadelphia workshops initiated work on the first cab-forward engines in late 1909. The design challenge extended far beyond merely reversing a locomotive. To position the crew at the front, every critical system, fuel, water, and steam, had to extend forward through 100 feet of steel and moving machinery. Coal was out of the question, as there was no way to shovel it from a tender now positioned at the very rear. Oil became the sole solution. Southern Pacific's access to inexpensive California crude made this feasible. These engines utilized thick bunker sea oil, which sloshed within a pressurized tender. Air pressure propelled this oil through 2-inch pipes that snaked beneath the boiler, past the moving drivers, and through flexible joints at the articulation point, ultimately reaching the firebox, situated just behind the cab. Baldwin's engineers were tasked with crafting innovative ball and socket connectors, capable of bending with every curve and twist of the track, all while securely containing a torrent of hot, pressurized oil. Similar challenges were faced by water and steam pipes, which extended the locomotive's length and flexed with its every movement. The machine's core innovation was its articulated frame. The inaugural true cab-forward locomotives, designated as the MC2 class, comprised numbers 402 through 416. These were compound mallets, featuring 2 sets of 8 driving wheels hinged in the middle, allowing them to navigate even the sharpest mountain bends. The front engine unit housed the cab and firebox, while the rear managed the tender and fuel supply. Measuring over 100 feet in length, these engines dwarfed any previously seen machinery in the Sierra Nevada. The cab itself was a groundbreaking feature, enclosed, insulated, and positioned at the very front of the train. For the first time, engineers could view the track directly through tunnels and snow sheds without contending with a haze of smoke. During their initial voyages through these structures, crews experienced an almost alien sensation. Cool, breathable air in the cab and an unobstructed forward view. Firemen, instead of inhaling coal dust, now operated a series of oil valves and burners, meticulously adjusting the atomized spray to maintain a roaring fire. Each ascent up the mountain served as a trial for the new design. Shop crews meticulously checked for leaks at the flexible joints, monitored for pressure drops, and inspected the oil lines after every journey. The articulated frame articulated precisely as intended, and the cab remained free of smoke. Reports from the Sierra consistently lauded the design. The cab forward was no longer merely a curiosity. It was a practical solution. This mechanical advancement was genuinely transformative. For the first time, the deadliest hazard of the mountains had a countermeasure integrated directly into the steel. Cab-forward locomotives didn't merely endure the Sierra. They dominated it. Southern Pacific did not settle for a handful of prototypes. Over the ensuing 3 decades, they commissioned 256 of these articulated behemoths, establishing the cab-forward as the definitive image of mountain railroading in the West. Accident records from the Sacramento division indicated a 40% reduction in major incidents after the cab-forwards assumed control of the grades. Visibility within the tunnels and snowsheds, once measured in feet, now extended to nearly a mile ahead on clear days. Engineers reported finally being able to discern signals and obstructions well in advance. For the first time in memory, crews navigated the hill without resorting to tying wet rags over their faces. The most severe cases of carbon monoxide poisoning disappeared from hospital records. Instead of collapsing at the throttle, firemen managed their burners with the cab windows open, allowing fresh mountain air to circulate. Freight capacity surged. A single cab forward could transport over 100 loaded cars up the 2.2% grades, negating the need for helper engines and significantly reducing delays. The machine, which critics had derided as a death trap, became the bedrock of the railroad's most perilous district. Crew petitions that once implored for relief now lauded the new engines. The mountain that had nearly crippled the railroad was finally mastered, and it was the so-called backward design that pioneered the way. By the early 1950s, Southern Pacific's mountain lines were transforming more rapidly than anticipated. Diesel-electric locomotives, initially a novelty, swept across the Sierra with a promise that steam power could no longer fulfill. Reliability, simplicity, and paramountly, economy. On paper, the disparity was undeniable. Diesel units cost approximately half as much to maintain per mile compared to the large cab forwards. There were no boilers to retube, no miles of oil lines prone to leakage, and no requirement for a perpetual army of machinists and boilermakers. For a railroad grappling with narrow profit margins and relentless competition, the figures dictated their decision. By 1955, the cab forwards that had once reigned over Donner Pass were already rare sights. Diesels spearheaded almost every heavy freight ascent up the grades, gliding through tunnels and snowsheds without filling them with smoke. The final regular cab forward assignments on the mountain ceased around 1956. Within a few years, almost all these giants were removed from the roster and sold for scrap. The machinery that had rescued so many crews from asphyxiation was displaced by a new wave of progress. Only one cab forward evaded the torch, a C-12 number 4294, manufactured in 1944. It was set aside for preservation as the last of its kind. Following its retirement, it was relocated to Sacramento, where it currently resides at the California State Railroad Museum, serving as a silent testament to an era when survival on the mountain hinged on a design once deemed backward by the world. This single preserved engine in Sacramento reminds us that genuine progress often defies conventional wisdom. Today, life or death challenges persist, demanding solutions that disregard tradition and ego. The lesson endures. When experts resist change, it is the stakes that truly matter, not superficial appearances. Innovation saves lives only when we are prepared to look ahead, rather than merely adhering to established paths. I would focus on promoting greater digital literacy and critical thinking skills across all age groups. In an era saturated with information, the ability to discern fact from fiction and to comprehend the nuances of online interactions is paramount for individual safety and societal well-being. By fostering a more informed populace, we can collectively build stronger defenses against misinformation, cyber threats, and manipulative tactics. My efforts would extend to advocating for robust, yet accessible cybersecurity education for everyone. This would encompass practical knowledge about safeguarding personal data, recognizing phishing attempts, and understanding the implications of online privacy settings. Equipping individuals with these essential tools would empower them to navigate the digital landscape more securely and confidently. Furthermore, I would champion initiatives that encourage empathy and responsible online conduct. By highlighting the impact of words and actions in virtual spaces, we can cultivate a culture of respect and create a less hostile online environment. This approach would not only reduce instances of cyberbullying and harassment, but also foster a more supportive and inclusive digital community. Finally, I would push for increased collaboration between technology companies, educational institutions, and government bodies. By working together, these entities can develop and implement comprehensive strategies that address emerging threats and proactively create safer digital platforms. This collective endeavor would ensure that safety measures evolve in step with technological advancements, protecting individuals in an ever-changing online world.